It was just harmless fun, my GF whispered while cozying up to her college ex at our friend group's cabin trip. I watched her share a blanket with him for 3 hours while she told me to lighten up and stop being so sensitive. I didn't scream or fight. While they were still laughing by the fire, I calmly made a decision that turned her harmless fun into a total nightmare she'll never forget. My name is Nate. I'm 28 years old. I work as a project manager at a mid-sized logistics company, the kind of job where you show up early, keep things moving, and don't make a lot of noise about it. A few months before that Saturday night, my manager pulled me into his office and told me I was on the shortlist for a senior role. I nodded, said thank you, and went back to my desk. That's pretty much how I handle most things. Brooke and I had been together for 2 years. She's 27, works in event marketing, the kind of job that suits her, because she's good at walking into a room and making everyone feel like the party just started. She's vivid. She's quick. She lights up when people are paying attention to her, and people usually are. When we first got together, I thought that energy was something I needed more of in my life. Maybe I was right. Maybe I just didn't think clearly enough about what it actually costs to be the stable one beside someone who's always chasing the next bright thing. Our friends used to joke about it. They'd say Brooke was the spark and I was the anchor. I laughed along with them. It took me longer than I'd like to admit to understand that anchors don't move, and eventually, some people start to resent that. We met through our friend group, actually. 6 of us, more or less, who'd been doing an annual cabin trip every October for 4 years. That's where Brooke and I first started talking. Same fire circle, same pine smell, same ritual of everyone dragging wood from the shed and arguing about how to build a proper flame. The trip meant something to all of us. It was the one weekend a year where nothing else existed. No work, no obligations, just the same people in the same place. Brooke was the one who organized the trip this year. She handled the rental, the group chat, the supply list. And sometime in late September, I was scrolling through my phone when a notification popped up. A new name had been added to the group chat. Connor. Brooke had dated Connor in college. They'd stayed in loose contact, after the kind of loose contact where she'd occasionally mention something he said or laugh at something he posted, and I'd remind myself it didn't mean anything. He was just part of the extended orbit. That's what I told myself. That's what she told me too, whenever I got quiet about it. He's harmless, she'd say. We're just friends. The thing about Connor is that I'd never actually met him in person before that trip. I knew his face from photos. Brooke's old Instagram posts she never bothered to archive, the kind you scroll past at 1 a.m. and tell yourself means nothing. I knew he lived about 2 hours from us, that he worked in sales, that he and Brooke still texted occasionally. She'd mentioned it once, casually, the way you mention something you've already decided isn't worth a conversation. I hadn't pushed back. That was a pattern between us. I'd feel something, stay quiet, tell myself I was being rigid. She'd call at me, making everything a thing. I'd agree, eventually, because I didn't want to be that guy. I didn't say anything when I saw the notification. I figured I could be an adult about it. I figured it was a group thing. I was wrong about that. Connor showed up Friday afternoon in a truck that was newer than mine. He had a bottle of expensive bourbon tucked under his arm, and that easy, unhurried confidence of someone who already knows he's going to have a good time. He hugged everyone when he walked in. Reese, Megan, the others warm and relaxed, like he'd been part of this group for years. Then he got to Brooke. The hug lasted a beat longer than the others. Not dramatically longer. Just enough, I noticed. I told myself not to make it a thing. The first night was fine, mostly. Dinner, drinks, the usual catching up that happens when you get 6 people in a cabin and take away their normal routines. Connor was easy to talk to, I'll give him that. He had good stories. He laughed at the right moments. He didn't try too hard. But I watched how Brooke moved around him. Lighter? Quicker. The version of herself she performs when she wants someone to keep watching her. At some point I brought it up. Quietly, just the 2 of us, when we stepped away from the group to grab drinks from the cooler. I didn't accuse her of anything. I just said I was getting a weird feeling about the dynamic. That's all I said. Earlier, I'd watched her touch Connor's arm when she laughed at something he said. The easy, unconscious kind of touch that means you're comfortable with someone. She hadn't touched my arm once that evening. I don't know if she realized that. I noticed. She looked at me like I'd told her the sky was green. Oh my God, Nate. Relax. Connor's harmless. She grabbed her drink and started walking back. Then she stopped, turned around, and said it the phrase she always reached for when she wanted to close a conversation she didn't feel like having. Lighten up. That was the first time she said it that weekend. It wasn't the last. I let it go. I went back to the fire. I sat in my chair and watched Connor make her laugh and told myself I was being rigid, that this was what she always said, and maybe she was right. Maybe I was. Saturday night, they sat together at the fire. That's when I understood I wasn't being rigid at all. Saturday started normally enough. Breakfast, a hike, the kind of easy afternoon that makes you think maybe you were wrong to worry. By the time the sun went down and someone dragged the first log out to the fire pit, I'd almost talked myself out of the feeling I'd been carrying since Friday night. The bonfire was the centerpiece of every trip. Everyone knew their role. Some people brought wood, some people brought drinks, someone always argued about the best way to get it started. Within 20 minutes, we had a good flame going, 6 chairs pulled into a loose circle, and the kind of darkness around us that makes a fire feel like the only warm thing left in the world. I sat down, got comfortable, told myself to just be present. Brooke sat next to me at first. Then the smoke shifted, or she said it did, and she picked up her chair and moved it to the other side of the circle, closer to Connor. I watched her set it down, watched her settle in, watched Connor lean slightly in her direction like it was the most natural thing. Across the fire, Megan caught my eye. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. She just looked at me for a second too long, then looked away. I kept my face still. I told myself to be steady. I drank my beer and watched the fire and let the conversation move around me. Brooke got louder as the night went on, brighter. She was laughing at everything Connor said, touching his knee when she made a point, tilting her head toward him when he talked like she was hanging on every word. I've known Brooke for 2 years. I know the difference between how she acts when she's relaxed and how she acts when she's performing. That night she was performing, and the audience she'd chosen wasn't me. Around 10 o'clock, I leaned over and said quietly, "Hey, can you come inside with me for a second?" I kept my voice low. I wasn't looking for an audience. I just needed 60 seconds alone with her. She turned and looked at me the way you look at a child who's interrupted something important. Then she waved her hand, a small, dismissive flick of the wrist, and turned back toward Connor. The fire had gone quiet for a moment, the way fires do. No one was talking, which meant everyone heard what came next. She leaned toward Connor and said it just loud enough to land. "It's just harmless fun." A small laugh. And then, glancing back at me, "Lighten up." It wasn't whispered. It was performed. There's a difference, and she knew exactly which one she was doing. Reese suddenly found his beer bottle very interesting. Megan went completely still. Nobody laughed. Nobody said anything at all. The fire crackled once, and the smoke drifted sideways, and the whole circle just sat there in the kind of silence that means everyone understood what just happened. I want to be clear about something. That moment, the phrase, the laugh, the glance back at me, that wasn't the first time Brooke had used those words. She'd said some version of lighten up or harmless fun every single time I'd tried to bring up how I felt about Connor over the past few weeks. Every time I'd mentioned it at home, quietly, just the two of us, she'd found a way to make it about my insecurity instead of her behavior. But she'd always done it in private, where I could at least pretend it was a conversation between two people. Doing it here, in front of everyone we knew, with a laugh that she shared with him instead of me, that was something different. That was a choice. I didn't say a word. I reached down and picked up my cup. I didn't slam it. I just set it down on the armrest, slowly, and something inside me went very quiet. I went inside under the pretense of getting more ice. That's the thing about being the steady one, you always have a plausible reason to step away. Nobody questions it. I walked through the back door, let it close behind me, and stood in the cabin kitchen in the dark for a moment before I hit the lights. The cooler was right there. I didn't open it. I just stood there, looking at the counter, listening to the laughter coming through the wall. There's a thing that happens when you've been quietly absorbing something for a long time, and then suddenly, in one specific moment, you stop. Not because you explode, not because you finally say the thing you've been holding back. You just stop, like a switch. And once it flips, you already know it doesn't flip back. I pulled out my phone and checked the drive time home. 4 hours and 12 minutes. I looked at my duffel bag sitting by the hallway where I'd left it Friday night. Then I looked back at my phone. Then I thought about something I hadn't thought about in a while. 3 weeks earlier, my manager had called me into his office and told me the senior role was mine if I wanted it. I'd driven home that evening, planning to tell Brooke over dinner. I'd made reservations. She'd canceled last minute. Something came up with a work event, she said. I'd rescheduled. Then life moved on, and I kept waiting for the right moment, and the right moment kept not coming. Standing in that kitchen, I realized I still hadn't told her. And somewhere between the cooler and the hallway, I understood I wasn't going to. Some news belongs to the version of your life that's actually moving forward. That promotion wasn't hers to celebrate anymore. I picked up my duffel bag and carried it to the bedroom. I packed in under 4 minutes. Toiletries, charger, the bottle of whiskey I'd brought, a 12-year scotch. I wasn't leaving behind. I did not touch Brooke's things. I did not leave a note. I moved quietly, methodically, the way I do when I've already made a decision and the only thing left is execution. Before I walked out, I sent Reese one text. 4 words. Heading out, don't make it weird. I didn't text Brooke. I carried my bag through the side door, loaded it into my trunk, and got behind the wheel. Through the tree line, I could still see the bonfire orange light pushing up through the pine branches, the sound of voices carrying in the cold air. I could still hear her laughing. I started the car. I looked at the dashboard clock. 11:47 p.m. I pulled out of the driveway and onto the dark road, and I didn't look in the rearview mirror. The highway was empty that late. Just headlights and dark pavement, and the kind of quiet that doesn't feel like absence, it feels like space. I remember thinking that was strange. How quiet could feel like something you'd been hungry for without knowing it. I'd spent 2 years being the steady one, the anchor, the person who absorbed friction and kept things smooth. Sitting alone in that car, in that silence, I didn't feel like I'd lost anything. I felt like I'd finally put something down. 47 minutes later, my phone lit up on the passenger seat. Brooke's name on the screen. I watched it ring. I let it go to voicemail. Then I put the phone face down and kept driving. I got home a little after 4 in the morning. I set my bag down by the door, fed the cat, drank a glass of water. Then I went to bed and slept better than I had in weeks. I didn't check my phone until the next morning. I wish I could say I was surprised by what I found. The first text from Brooke came in at 12:34 a.m., 47 minutes after I'd pulled out of the driveway. Where are you? 2 question marks. 7 minutes later, at 12:41, are you seriously doing this? No question mark that time. A statement, an accusation dressed up as a question. Then, at 1:02 a.m., a voice note. I pressed play. I heard her voice, unsteady, somewhere between upset and angry, starting to say my name. I listened for 3 seconds, then I deleted it. I'm not proud of that, but I also wasn't in a position to be her emotional support system at 4 in the morning after what had just happened. I knew what that voice note was. It was the version of Brooke that comes out when consequences start to feel real. I'd seen it before. It never lasted. The texts that followed told the whole story on their own. By 1:15 a.m., she'd shifted from confused to apologetic. I didn't mean for it to come out like that. You know how I get when I've been drinking. By 1:30, she'd pivoted again. You've always been too sensitive about Connor. This is a pattern with you. And then, at 1:47 a.m., the one that told me everything I needed to know about how she'd already decided to frame this. You embarrassed me in front of everyone by just getting up and leaving. I had embarrassed her. There was one more text, sent at 2:03 a.m., that I've thought about more than the others. It was short. It said, "It was harmless fun, Nate." That's all it ever was. She used the exact phrase. The one she'd been reaching for every time I brought up my discomfort over the past few weeks. The one she'd said out loud at the fire, aimed at Connor like a shared joke, loud enough for the whole circle to hear. And now here it was again, at 2 a.m., in a text like if she just kept saying it enough times it would become true. I screenshotted it. I didn't know why at the time. I just knew I wanted to remember clearly. Megan texted me at 8:14 the next morning. No preamble, no small talk. Just, hey, what she did last night was disrespectful, and I want you to know we all saw it. You okay? I read it twice. I typed back. Yeah, I'm good. And I meant it. I thought about that word Megan had used. Disrespectful. Not dramatic, not catastrophic, just that plain, accurate word. I'd been tiptoeing around it for weeks, giving Brooke the benefit of the doubt, telling myself I was being too rigid, too sensitive, too whatever she needed me to be to make the conversation go away. But the word Megan used was the right word. What happened at that fire wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't Brooke being playful or me failing to read the room. It was disrespect, with an audience, and everyone in that circle had recognized it even if nobody had said so out loud until now. Reese called Sunday afternoon. He didn't have a lot to say, but what he said mattered. After I'd left, Brooke had come back to the fire like nothing happened, poured herself a drink, asked where I'd gone, said I'd probably gone to bed early. Nobody laughed, nobody played along. Connor had gotten quiet, the kind of quiet that looks a lot like someone who suddenly understands the situation he's actually in. By Sunday morning, 2 people had already packed up and driven home. The cabin cleared out faster than usual. Nobody said why. They didn't have to. Reese paused at the end of all that and said, "For what it's worth, man, she handled that badly." Everyone saw it. That was Reese's version of a speech. I told him I appreciated it. Brooke posted something on Instagram that evening. One of those vague, soft focus captions, something about knowing who your people really are and choosing peace. The kind of post that's designed to look like wisdom but reads, to anyone who knows the context, as someone trying to control a narrative that's already slipped out of their hands. I screenshotted that too. I never used it. I just kept it, the same way you keep a receipt for something you hope you never have to return. She called me 14 times over the next 4 days. I let every single one go to voicemail. I answered on day 5 once and said 3 words. She called 14 times over 4 days. I let everyone go to voicemail. I didn't listen to any of them. On the 5th day, a Wednesday evening, I answered. I was at home. I'd already eaten dinner. The TV was on in the background, muted. I picked up on the second ring, sat back in my chair, and waited. She started talking immediately, fast, the way she always talked when she was nervous, layering sentences on top of each other, pivoting before one thought finished, filling silence like she was afraid of what I might say into it. She was sorry. She hadn't meant for it to come out that way. Connor was just an old friend, and I'd always had a thing about him that she never fully understood. She'd been drinking. The whole group had been in a weird mood. She felt like I'd humiliated her by leaving without saying anything, and she deserved better than that. She said the word unfair 3 times in under 2 minutes. I waited until she was finished. Then I said, "I'm not doing this." She went quiet for a second. Then, "Not doing what?" "The relationship." Another pause. Longer this time. Then her voice shifted, less nervous, more certain, the tone she used when she decided she was the reasonable one in the room. "You're overreacting. It was harmless fun, Nate. You've always been too rigid about this stuff. You're going to throw away 2 years over one night?" I didn't answer that. I'd had a list in my head, actually every specific moment, every time I'd swallowed something and called it maturity, every text I'd screenshotted and kept without using. I could have gone through all of it. I chose not to. Some things don't need to be said to the person who hurt you. They just need to be true. Instead, I said, "I don't need you to understand my reasons. I just need you to know they're final." She started to say something else. I hung up. I sat there for a moment with the phone in my hand, TV still muted, apartment quiet. I didn't feel the urge to call back. I didn't feel the urge to text. I just felt the particular stillness of a decision that had already been made and was now simply done. The harder question, honestly, was the friend group. Reese and Megan, I wasn't worried about. But there were 2 others who went quiet after the cabin, not hostile, just uncertain. The way people get when they don't want to choose sides and haven't figured out yet that staying neutral is its own kind of choice. I'd known these people for years. The October trip had been ours for 4 years running. I didn't know if I was walking away from all of it, but I kept coming back to the same thought, the same place I'd landed on that dark highway driving home. Peace is better. A smaller, calmer life is still a better life. Whatever I lost in that friend group, I wasn't going back to what I'd had in that relationship. That math was simple. The only message that caught me off guard during that whole week came not from anyone in the friend group, but from Frank Brooks' father. He texted me the same way he always did. No mention of the breakup, no drama. "Hey Nate, how's work going? Hope you're good." I stared at it for a moment, then typed back honestly. We went back and forth for a few minutes, same as always. He never brought up Brooke. I didn't either. Then, 3 weeks after the cabin, the official offer letter landed in my inbox. Senior project manager. I opened it alone, at my kitchen table, coffee going cold beside me. It felt exactly right. I thought about telling Brooke. For about half a second. I want to tell you exactly what happened at that bonfire. Not the version I summarized in my head on the drive home, not the cleaned-up version I gave Reese when he called the actual thing, as it happened, in the order it happened. Because I think it matters. I think the details matter. It was Saturday, around 10 o'clock. The fire was at its peak, the kind of fire that takes a couple hours to build right. where the wood has settled into coals and the flames have gone from frantic to steady and the heat reaches you from 6 feet away. The six of us had been sitting in that circle for about 2 hours. Drinks were going. Conversation was loose. The sky above the tree-kin was completely black, and the only light for 100 yards was that fire. Brooke and Connor had been drifting toward each other all evening. I want to be precise about this, because it wasn't one dramatic moment, it was a series of small adjustments, each one deniable on its own. The way she turned her body toward him when he talked. The way she laughed a half-second earlier at his jokes than at anyone else's. The way she'd refilled her drink and come back to her chair and somehow ended up a little closer to his than she'd been before. Any one of those things, alone, I could have let pass. Together, over 2 hours, they told a story. Around 9:30, she picked up her chair and moved it. Closer to Connor. The smoke, she said. It kept shifting. I watched her set the chair down on his side of the circle, watched her settle into it, watched him lean slightly in her direction without missing a beat in the conversation, like this was the most natural arrangement in the world. Across the fire, Megan looked at me. Not a dramatic look. Just a glance that lasted a second too long before she dropped her eyes to her drink. I kept my face still. By 10 o'clock, Brooke had stopped performing for the group and started performing for one person. She was laughing louder than the conversation warranted. She was touching Connor's knee when she made a point that same easy, unconscious touch I'd noticed Friday night, the one she hadn't given me once all weekend. At some point, she pulled a blanket off the back of her chair and draped it across her lap, and Connor reached over and tucked the edge of it down without being asked, and she smiled at him, the way you smile at someone who already knows what you need. That's when I asked her to come inside. I kept my voice low. I leaned toward her and said, "Hey, can you come check on the drinks with me for a second?" I wasn't looking for a scene. I wasn't going to accuse her of anything in front of everyone. I just needed 60 seconds alone with her, one real conversation, the kind we should have had 3 weeks ago when Connor's name first appeared in the group chat. She turned and looked at me, and I watched something move across her face, not guilt, not even irritation exactly. More like the mild impatience of someone who's been interrupted in the middle of something they were enjoying. She waved her hand. A small flick of the wrist. Dismissive, the kind of gesture you use on someone who said something you don't have time for. Then she turned back to Connor. The fire had gone quiet at that exact moment, the wood settling, the conversation hitting a natural pause. One of those silences that lasts maybe 4 seconds but feels longer. And into that silence, Brooke leaned toward Connor, close enough that her shoulder pressed against his, and she said it. It's just harmless fun. A small laugh. Shared between them. And then, glancing back at me with an expression I can only describe as performative patience, the look of someone playing the role of reasonable person for an audience, she said, "Lighten up." It wasn't a whisper. It was said at a volume that the entire circle could hear, and she knew that. This wasn't a private reassurance aimed at me. This was a line delivered to the group, with Connor as the co-star and me as the punchline. I want to be clear about that distinction because it's the only thing that matters. I could have absorbed the words in private. What I could not absorb, what I had no interest in absorbing, was being made small in front of every person we both knew, as a joke, while she leaned into another man. Reese found his beer bottle very interesting. Megan went completely still. Nobody laughed. Nobody said a word. The fire crackled once, and the smoke drifted, and 6 people sat in a circle and understood exactly what had just happened. I reached down and picked up my cup. I set it on the armrest slowly, without slamming it. And something inside me, something that had been holding on, staying patient, giving the benefit of every doubt available, went quiet. Not angry quiet. Decided quiet. That's the last clear memory I have of that fire circle. The orange light on everyone's faces. The smell of pine and wood smoke. Brooke still smiling, already turning back toward Connor like the matter was closed. And me, sitting there, completely calm, understanding that it was. I went inside to get more ice. I didn't come back. What happened after I left, I know secondhand. Brooke came back to the fire eventually. She poured herself a drink, asked where I'd gone, said I'd probably gone to bed early. Nobody confirmed that. Nobody laughed. Connor got quiet. The particular quiet of someone who's just understood the actual shape of the situation he's walked into. By the time the fire burned down, the mood was gone. 2 people packed up and left Sunday morning without making plans to meet up again. The cabin cleared faster than any year before it. Nobody thought it was harmless. That's what Megan said the next morning. Nobody in that circle, Not one person who'd been sitting there when Brooke said those words had walked away thinking what they'd seen was fine. 6 months later, I heard through Reese that Connor had done something similar to Brooke at a bar, in front of people they both knew, publicly and without apology. I heard she'd been humiliated. I sat with that information for a moment. I didn't feel satisfaction exactly. I just felt a faint, quiet recognition. Like hearing the last line of a story you already knew the ending to. The Monday after I got the offer letter, I walked into a larger office for the first time. Nobody else was in yet. Just me, a cup of coffee, and the particular quiet of a room that was now mine. I stood there for a moment and didn't do anything. I just stood there. It was enough. The rest came in pieces, the way endings usually do, not one clean break, but a slow settling, like a house after the storm has passed. Megan stayed close. Reese stayed close. The two who'd gone quiet after the cabin eventually drifted back, never quite addressing what had happened, just resuming the way people do when enough time puts distance between them and an uncomfortable moment. The friend group didn't shatter. It just quietly rearranged itself around the space Brooke had left. Brooke herself, I heard things, the way you always hear things when you share a social circle. The marketing job ended badly, something involving a workplace situation that multiple people mentioned but nobody wanted to fully explain. The Instagram went quiet. Mutual friends stopped bringing her up around me, which told me more than any specific update could. I didn't track it. I didn't need to. I just noted it, the way you note whether or not your problem, just the way things turned out. Frank texted me a few months after the breakup. Same tone as always. How's work? Hope you're good. I told him about the promotion. He said he wasn't surprised, that I'd always had my head on straight. We got lunch once, a Tuesday afternoon, a diner near his office. He never brought up Brooke. I never brought up Brooke. We talked about work and traffic and whether the city's new highway construction would ever actually finish. It was one of the better lunches I'd had in a long time. I think about that cabin sometimes. The bonfire, the orange light, the sound of her laughing as I pulled out of the driveway. I don't think about it with anger. I don't think about it with regret. I think about it the way you think about the last moment before something finally made sense. She called it harmless fun. She told me to lighten up. For 2 years I'd been her anchor, steady and present and patient, and the day I finally let go of the rope was the day I understood what steady actually felt like when it belonged to you alone. Some forms of disrespect don't need a response. They just need a decision. And peace is better. If you've ever been told your feelings were the problem when your instincts were completely right, you already know what I mean. Drop a comment. And if this one hit, you know what to do.